Hey people, so we've got the HP EliteBook A30G7 here. It's just a really quick unbox and have a play with it next to the old G5. G5 and G6 are really similar, so this is quite a significant upgrade. When you go to the supermarket and you buy eggs, this is quite immediately what comes to mind looking at that packaging. It's quite a strange one. Be honest, I'm surprised that it got here safely. Quick start guide as well, in addition to the other documentation. There. What? Okay, so this is probably still the latest generation. I know the G8 is probably on the track to be released quite soon, but I think in terms of general availability, this one is still really modern chassis. So the charger, it's quite an interesting design. So I think what it's meant to do is make the cables a little bit more rugged, so you're less likely to damage the cable. Really welcome move. So on the inside, we've got the privacy screen. So I imagine this is 1000 nits privacy screen. So there's a 250 nits, 400 nits, and 1000 nits privacy panel. I think really the 250 is probably the one you're going to see the most. The 400 is probably the more desirable, more versatile one. I think the privacy panel is likely to still have some trade-offs in terms of the color accuracy and the viewing angle versus a standard screen. So that's why I suggested 400 is probably still the more desirable one. If we switch on privacy mode, I'm looking from the side, I can't see anything. You can probably still see something, but as soon as I start moving it around the edge, I think it probably stops out there. It's not a totally, like, I can still see some things if I'm close enough, but it's just not legible anymore. It's quite an interesting feature. They've definitely improved it across the generations. It's just, there used to be quite big trade-offs when you go privacy. Even if you switch it off, there's less display vibrance and less viewing angle and less contrast. We're just booting up for the first time. As you can see, it is really sleek chassis, really minimal bezel on the top, bottom. And it just feels really modern. It feels as if the HP's consumer design language has made it their way onto the business line. On the inside, you have the upwards facing speakers, so it's always quite good to have the speakers facing directly to you. The power button is now actually a part of the keyboard, which is an interesting design. In some competitor laptops, you have a dedicated button with fingerprint sensor built in. Maybe that's directional travel for some manufacturers, for instance, Lenovo and Dell. I think that's a more convenient one. For me personally, part of the reservation with having the power button so close to delete button and print screen is that inevitably you're going to accidentally press it. So I guess in the Windows you can always change the settings. So when you press a power button, you can just let the computer do nothing or go to sleep. So this is really like the nano design. It doesn't fully go back, which is quite a strange one. I think my hesitation with this is, can you hear that? Of the metal chipping into the desk. The edge of the lid is actually what's propping up the laptop. It would suggest for HP to look at Dell's Latitude 7400 design, where they put some rubber on the edge of the system so it doesn't scratch. This model has a smart card, it's quite nice. Audio jack, 2 USB 3 ports. The other side, it's a 2 Thunderbolt 3/USB-C ports, HDMI, and also the power jack. No Ethernet, and as you can see, no ports at the back. The SIMS tray is here, but the 4G model is something you would have to configure at the point of purchase. It's unknown if the antenna is going to be there. The top row feels a lot softer. Yeah, interesting. So the power button, it actually has quite a bit more firm feel to it. So you have to actually press into it. Same for the enter button and I think space button. You can feel it. I think what they're trying to do is understanding that there's a limitation in how much travel they can put in the laptop. So they've got to, for certain keys, just create that feel of action, even if it's a little bit more than others. The directional key are quite compressed. On the center, you'll notice there's no track point anymore, and there's no dedicated click button on the trackpad. Click button, the click feel is there. Not totally convinced by it. So after playing with it for a few minutes. I think the keyboard, it feels a good step forward, I think, from the G5, G6, in the sense that some of the keys are clearly more pronounced. Personally, still into the older ThinkPads. The Dell laptops, they're also a little bit different. It depends on the model and it depends on the generation of what you go for. What we have here on this laptop is we've got the i7. This is the Intel side of the laptop. So it goes all the way up to high brightness. This laptop you can buy with the 6-core option, but to be honest, the 6-core is so scarce at the moment. I suspect most people would probably see this or the i5 model if they get the Intel side of it. For a 13.3-inch laptop, this is more upgradable than many of the Dell and Lenovo competitors. Lenovo X13, for instance, you can't upgrade the RAM. Under the base cover, remove the screws. There's going to be aluminum shield. Remove that, and the RAM is then just serviceable there. So in addition to the RAM, the M2 SSD and the Wi-Fi chip is also upgradable. It's the cellular card that has to be configured at the point of purchase. But this is much better than the X13 in that sense. It's a little bit better than the Dell, which is a little bit better than the Lenovo X13 where you can't upgrade the RAM, and the Dell where you can't upgrade the RAM. We've got the A30 G5 here. G5, G6, really incremental difference. When you move to the G7, it's a very significant upgrade. I actually thought this was the EliteBook 840 for a moment because of the sheer size difference. As you can see, it's the top, it's really noticeable. I think what's the most obvious is the bezel on the top and on the bottom has been minimized to such an extent that it's like two different laptops. Of course, there's some costs doing this. You've no longer have the physical click button and you don't have the track point on the inside. But for everything else, it's housing the same display size, but it's just more compact. Surprisingly, the width of the laptop seems to be roughly the same, and the size of the keyboard, it seems to be roughly the same looking from the top. If you look at one on top of the other, you can see, I think, predominantly the space saving has been on this side. The footprint this way is roughly the same. It's just really significant. It's like a chopped display. It's impressive. Whereas the G5 uses this slot to do the cooling, the newer G7 has a cooling vent which is hidden just underneath these grills. So the heat actually goes up the display and some underneath. It's not going to go directly onto your hands if you're left-handed, for instance. So that's quite a good improvement, I think. Hopefully it's not going to change the temperature on the screen or make the screen age any faster. I think that should be fine. So I think for the detailed benchmarks and the performance stuff, there's plenty of review online, for instance, at Notebook Checks. Take a look. I think, generally it seems to be a quite good design. People probably don't expect Ethernet port in this compact chassis. It just feels so much more modern, a chassis, if that makes sense. I think if you're thinking of this one and the 835 G7, it's probably going to come back to if you can get the AMD model at the moment. The supply side seems to be somewhat more limited on the AMD side. On the Intel side, the single core performance is still going to be really decent for the everyday stuff. It's just for the multitasking stuff, it's going to shine a little bit more on the AMD-based 835 G7. Really welcome design. It really pushes HP business line a lot further to be something that even an average consumer can use with reassurance that it doesn't cut the corner in terms of the media consumption. So really good display. Speakers I've briefly tested. It seems to be decent, and especially because it's upwards facing.
This isn't human anymore. You're looking to the natural eyes, following the beat of the chemical. This isn't human
anymore. Price-wise, it's going to be quite comparable, I guess, to the Dell, Lenovo competitors. They usually benchmark quite well, so they're supposed to be at a certain price. This is a more upgradable system than many of its competitors. It's really good to see HP keeping the 2 RAM slots in the system, and also the M2, full-size M2, not the tiny M2. So that's quite nice. So in terms of what to look out for, I think this chassis, it's if you drop it, I think we've seen quite a lot EliteBooks being dropped, and it's not pretty when you drop this chassis. It's just really not pretty. So a case or something, carry it in a sleeve, it's going to help a little bit. Between the G7 and G5, which one would I go for? I think with the G7, it's the price-wise, it's just more it's more dear. I think that's the expectation. I think with the G5, it's quite widely available from what we've seen. So personally, I might just pick up a refurb G5 or G6. They're going to be great price. I don't mind the screen bezel. I don't necessarily need something that thin and light. I just need something that does a job, can support lots of RAM. So I mean, personally, it doesn't quite necessarily justify the upgrade for me. Having said that, I can certainly see that this is more modern chassis. So if you're a company, you want to get your colleagues new laptops, and this is a new standard. You don't go back, if that makes sense. Anyway, hope this helps. Any question, drop it down in the comments. Thanks.